Right, here I am, Andy Excel, back again with another NFXL podcast. This is my review of week 4. So, weekly thing I do, which teams had a good week, which teams had a bad week. So, my questions coming into this week were how many teams would remain perfect for the season, how many would still be winless, and then getting to those, if you like, different achievements, not an achievement, the latter one, whose week was good or bad? And the same question for all those who came into this week with 1 or 2 wins. Getting to or above 500 could be key for these teams as they approach the quarter mark of the regular season. So, what does this make the outlook for those teams look like going forward? Is it a sunny disposition they have, or does it look distinctly murky? So, let's get into the good week teams, starting with the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, the Eagles took advantage of an injury depleted Bucks team to get a road win that takes them to 4-0. And this win over a potential rival for top seeding in the NFC gives them the tiebreak over the Bucks as well. This win was, for me, by far their best performance of the season. The Eagles have kind of stuttered to 3-0. They've not played anywhere near their best. But if they continue to get close to their championship winning form of last season, as they did in this game, they are taking a firm grip on the NFC East. And they're going to be tough to overhaul for top seeding in the NFC come the postseason, which would put them right on track for another Super Bowl appearance and maybe retention of their trophy. Now, switch over to the team they met in the Super Bowl last year, the Kansas City Chiefs. They had a good week as well. The AFC champion Chiefs have now recovered from their 0-2 start to get back to 500 and are within a game of the AFC West leading Chargers, who lost this week. And they did so by getting a win over Baltimore, who were banged up in terms of injuries. But even before Lamar Jackson left the game, the Chiefs were well in control of this one. And with the receiver core getting close to full strength now that Xavier Worthy is back, they're on track for the postseason as a minimum. Now they have a road game in Jacksonville ahead of them before they host the Lions in week 6. So they need to keep this momentum going, build on this, and remain on at least 500 for the season after those 2 games to keep the pressures on the Chargers in their division. But a very good week for the Chiefs. As it was for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they pulled off a win in Dublin to take them 3-1 for the season. By definition, any winning week is a good week. But what makes this one stand out from the crowd is not just the Steelers' efforts, but the Ravens losing and also potentially losing Lamar Jackson due to that hamstring injury. With Joe Burrow having already been lost for the season by the Bengals and now Jackson facing a worrying hamstring injury, plus all the other injuries the Ravens are having to deal with, the door to the AFC North is open wide for the Steelers if they can take the opportunity in the coming weeks. The question is, are they good enough to walk through that open door? Now, they get to rest up on bye in week 5, hoping more bad things open to the Ravens and Bengals. Then they host Cleveland before a road trip to Cincy in week 7. So these next 3 or 4 weeks could see the Steelers really take control of the AFC North. The door is open for them. I've sort of knocked them all season and said I didn't think they'd make the postseason. But given how things are going wrong for the Ravens and Bengals, there's a wide open window of opportunity. Doors are open. Everything else you want to say, Steelers have just got to be good enough to walk through it now. The Jags, they had a good week. The Jacksonville Jaguars pulled off a surprise road win over the previously perfect 49ers to get to 3-1 for the season, which is enough to give them a share of the lead in the AFC South. Now, they have taken advantage of coming up against teams in poor form and in the 49ers case, poor health to get to 3-1. But any win in San Fran is a fine achievement, which makes this a good week for them, even before the Colts lost for the first time this season. So it was a very good week after that happened. They have 3 games ahead of them in November, which will be a more severe test of their postseason credentials, as those games are against the Chiefs, Seahawks, and Rams. The first 2 at home before they take on the Rams in London. So we'll know a lot more about the Jags after those 3 games. But they've certainly had a good week 4. I'm going to have a quick drink before I move on to the next one. They're the Seattle Seahawks. After 2 wide margin wins, the Seahawks edged to a significant win over Arizona that takes them to 3-1 for the season. They nearly blew it though, They had a big lead in this one and needed a dying seconds Jason Myers field goal to clinch it. In truth, I still see them as inferior to the Rams and, when healthy, the 49ers in the NFC West. But they are 3-1 and at the very least well in the wildcard hunt in the NFC. So they've had a good week, as have the Atlanta Falcons, and boy did they need it. The Falcons bounced back in style from the horror show against the Panthers in week 3 with a win over the Commanders. And meritorious as this was, though, it has to be said it came against the Commanders team weakened by injuries, most notably Jaden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. But with the Falcons being the only NFC team to win this week, their divisional title hopes are being reignited after this win. So the Falcons have had a really good week. As has the Buffalo Bills, another good week for them. They were strong favourites to beat the Saints at home in week 4. But other teams have fallen at such hurdles this season, so the Bills joining the Eagles as the only team in the conference to have a perfect record makes them another step closer to the postseason. And with the Ravens, Chiefs, Texans, and Bengals all struggling early this season and having issues to deal with, the Bills remain well on course for top seeding in the AFC. They've got the Patriots at home this week, and if they win that one, they've pretty much wrapped up the AFC East after week 5, which is incredible. So, really good week for the Bills. Last team to have a good week, the Denver Broncos. Broncos D and Bo Nix took advantage of the Bengals' downward spiralling to get an emphatic win that gets them back to 2-2. And they, like the Chiefs, are now just a game back of the Chargers in that division. They did really need this win, though, to avoid falling to 1-3 ahead of the toughest of all road trips to Philly in week 5. So if they'd lost this one, they would have been staring down the barrel, potentially 1-4 after week 5. So a good week for them gives them some breathing room. As even if they do lose in Philly, they could still be in a wildcard qualifying position in the AFC after week 5, which makes this a good week for the Broncos. That wraps up the good weeks. Here comes the bad weeks. No team had a worse week than the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens fall to 1-3, having lost to 3 teams who are real contenders this season in the Bills, Lions, and now the Chiefs. Losing games against these type of teams are the teams you'll have to overcome in the postseason. So it's a bad habit to get into. So that in itself is worrying enough for the Ravens. But more worrying is their increasing list of significant injuries on the defensive side of their roster. Add to that the hamstring injury suffered by Lamar Jackson, which we all wait to hear and see what the prognosis on that is going forward. But if he misses significant time, the Ravens themselves could be hamstrung in terms of getting back to 500, especially considering their other injury woes. They do have 2 home games ahead prior to their bye week, starting against another team that's struggling in the Texans, who are also 1-3. Then the Rams come to town. They somehow need to find a way to win at least one of those, even if Jackson's out, to avoid falling back to the back of the pack in both their division and their AFC wildcard race. So key part of the season coming up for the Ravens now. The Cincinnati Bengals, they ran the Ravens close to having the worst week of all. Offensively, things are going from bad to worse to terrible for the Bengals since Joe Burrow went down. Jake Browning played it safe in the first half, and he did not see at least 2 wide open deep passes that Burrow would have made into TDs. Now, we should not expect Browning to make the plays Burrow makes, but these were clear and obvious openings he failed to utilise. And for the Bengals to get their offense functioning, it looks increasingly likely they will have to acquire a quarterback via a trade. Having said that, the Bengals are 2-2 in a winnable division, considering the Ravens' 1-3 record and injury rows of their own. Things aren't all bad for the Bengals, but for me now, they have to act decisively this week to either get Browning on track or upgrade on him. And if we're talking about going into the trade market, I'm going to throw a few names out there and then I'm going to indulge myself. Now, the obvious names people will throw out there are Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson. Wilson's probably affordable given his recent history. Kirk Cousins has still comes with a very big price tag, so that probably puts him out of the Bengals' range and gives him a potential problem down the road if he played well. What do they do? There may be others, throw a few names out there that teams might be willing to let go and might be options for the Bengals to look at. Tyrod Taylor from the Jets, Desmond Ridder's buried on the Vikings depth chart, as is Drew Lock in Seattle. Another one I'll throw out there, two other names, and then I'll go into a bit more detail about. Case Keenum is buried on the Bears depth chart, and not buried on the depth chart. In fact, he saw some game action this week. Andy Dalton, the Red Rocket, to go back to Cincy. And the two that intrigued me are the last two. Case Keenum, whose gunslinging nature may be a fit for the dynamic receivers the Bengals possess, but the Andy Dalton one would be fantastic, as it would bring the Red Rocket back to Cincy, where he'd be reunited with head coach Zach Taylor, who was offensive coordinator when Dalton was there between 2016 and 2019. And also offensive coordinator Dan Pitcher, who was on the same coaching staff at that time. So there's connections there, and there's a very strong connection between Andy Dalton and Cincinnati. And it's just one of those things that you think about it and you think, I'd love that to happen. So let's see, but that's me indulging myself. But it was a bad week for the Bengals, and they surely have to do something, and quickly. But I'll move on. Next team to have a bad week, the Green Bay Packers. Now, in the last 2 weeks, the Packers have lost to a team with a strong defense and practically no offense in Cleveland, and then failed to beat a team with an offense but practically no defense in Dallas. So that's not the formula required of a team hoping to take the Lions' divisional title away from them. So week 4 was a bad week for the Pack, and having 2 bad weeks in a row is not the stuff champions are made of. If the regular season ended now, the Packers would be clinging on to the final wildcard berth in the NFC. So they need to get back on track and quickly, which makes it a good team to have time to have a bye week, I should say, and to try and get healthy and do a mental reset ahead of the home game against the Bengals. But if they lost that one, the alarm bells would be ringing very loudly for the Packers. Next team to have a bad week were the Los Angeles Chargers. After week 3, they were well in control of the AFC West ahead of what looked like an eminently winnable game at the Giants in week 4. But their offensive line just fell away injured. Jackson Dart had a decent first game as the Giants starter. So you can't really say the Chargers blew it. And they do still retain the divisional lead. But they've let the Chiefs and the Broncos right back into the race to win this division by losing that game, and their offensive line injuries have to be a worry going forward. So that's a bad week for the Chargers, as it was for the Arizona Cardinals, who suffered a second narrow loss in a row within the division. That drops the Cardinals to 2-2, and in what could be a tightly contested division, certainly looks that way, puts them in a bad spot in terms of tiebreakers, which could be crucial. And this loss to the Seahawks came in a manner that I predicted, with the Seahawks getting multiple pressures on Kyler Murray, leading him to become increasingly inaccurate as a passer. Now, I do not Murray, and I've said before, I don't think he should be seen in the same light as many see him. But this is not all on him, as Marvis Harrison can certainly share the blame for the 2 picks that were decisive in this game. But the fact I could see this happening is indicative of an inherent weakness in Murray's game. I can't see that going away. But on the flip side, they have a week 5 home game against the Titans, which is a great chance for the Cardinals to get back above 500 and stay in the race for the NFC West. Lose that one, though, and things would look very bleak for them. Right, next team to these next batch of teams, not just having a bad week, but they're having a bad season. Start with the New Orleans Saints, who hung tough with the Bills in week 4 until the final quarter. So again, there's credit in their loss, but they're still lost, and they're now 0-4, and they're one of the 3 teams to remain winless this season, and they're the only team in the NFC to suffer that fate. 0-4 teams do not make the postseason, so now forward planning becomes the priority for the Saints in order to avoid this fate again in 2026. Tennessee Titans, another bad week for them, the second team to lose their opening 4 games. The Titans cannot even claim credit in defeat, as they seem to be regressing rather than improving, having been blanked by the Texans in week 4. Now, before Halloween, they have the Cardinals, Raiders, Patriots and Colts, and failure to win any of those would put them 0-8 and in a really scary position as Halloween approaches. New York Jets. Oh, here we go. The Jets joined the Titans and the Saints on 0-4, having like the Titans, lost to another winless team in week 4. Now, in that game against the Dolphins, listen to this. The Jets had more first downs, over 100 yards more offensive yardage, tops the Dolphins for both pass and rush offensive yardage, had nearly double the return yardage of the Dolphins, went for over 7 yards a play on offense, saw the Dolphins lose their top wide receiver in Tyreek Hill, and still contrived to find a way to lose. A first quarter fumble as he was going into the end zone by Braden Allen was the precursor to an almost endless sequence of pre-snap penalties for illegal formations and procedures that had head coach Aaron Glenn looking on with utter disbelief. This Jets team has talent, but cannot seemingly get out of its own way when it comes to finding ways to win rather than lose. But that said, as such, if they use their draft picks well and they have talent on the roster, they do have a chance to turn this around next season. But this loss pretty much ends their postseason chances of this campaign. Now, the Dolphins might have beaten the Jets, but it was a bad week for them as well. Because of already detailed, they were basically outplayed by the Jets. And they lost Tyreek Hill. So even though they won, it's a bad week for the Finns. As getting outplayed by the Jets and losing your star wide receiver makes the immediate future look pretty bleak for them. So that wraps up week 4. It's a good week, bad week look. I'm going to come back with a piece or pieces now where I'm going to go through my first full list of power rankings after 4 weeks. I've also got pieces coming up, which I'll see where I can all fit it in one, but they'll be in future pieces to do with the MVP race as it looks at the moment and Offensive Rookie of the Year. I'll give you my top 10s in those, but they'll be coming up soon. But that's my review of week 4 done and dusted. So enjoy that, and I'll see you soon.